I'd say most of my science colleagues still feel that talking about consciousness as science is just bullshit. But what I've noticed is when I push them a little harder about why they think it's bullshit, they split into two camps that are in complete disagreement with each other. Half of them roughly will say, oh, consciousness is bullshit because it's just the same thing as intelligence.
Okay.
And the other half will say consciousness is bullshit because obviously machines can't be conscious, which is obviously totally inconsistent with saying it's the same thing as intelligence. What's really powered the AI revolution in recent decades is just moving away from philosophical quibbles about what does intelligence really mean in a deep philosophical sense, and instead making a list of tasks and saying, can it do this task? Can it do this task? And that's quantitative. You can train your systems to get better at the task. And I think you'd have a very hard time if you went to the NeurIPS conference and argued that machines can never be intelligent, right? So if you take that, if you then say intelligence is the same as consciousness, you're predicting that machines are conscious then if they're smart. But we know that consciousness is not the same as intelligence, just by some very simple introspection. We can do it like right now. So for example, like what does it say here? I guess we shouldn't do product.
No, I don't mind.
Let's do this one. What does it say?
It says, towards more interpretable AI with sparse autoencoders by Joshua Engels.
Great. This is a PhD thesis of my student, Josh Engels, or the master's thesis. So like, how did you do that computation? Like 30 years ago, if I gave you just a bunch of numbers that are the actual and red, green, and blue strengths of the pixels and this, and ask you what does it say, people didn't. This is a hard problem, right? Even harder is if you just open your eyes and ask, who is this? And you say it's Max, right? But you can do it like this. But think about how it felt. Do you actually feel that if you open your eyes and you see this as Max, that you know the algorithm that you used to recognize my face?
No.
Same here. For me, it's pretty obvious. It feels like my consciousness, there's some part of my information processing that is conscious, and it's kind of got an email from the face recognition module saying, face recognition complete. The answer is, it's so and so. So in other words, you do something when you recognize people that's quite intelligent but not conscious.
Right.
And I would say actually a large fraction of what your brain does, you're just not conscious about. You find out about the results of it, often after the fact. So you can have intelligence without consciousness. That's the first point I'm making. And second, you can have consciousness without intelligence, without accomplishing any tasks. Like, did you have any dreams last night?
None that I remember.
But have you ever had a dream that you remember? Yeah. So there was consciousness there, but if someone was just looking at you lying there in the bed, you probably weren't accomplishing anything, right? So I think it's obvious that consciousness is not the same. You can have consciousness without intelligence and vice versa. So those who say that consciousness equals intelligence are being sloppy. Now, what is it then? My guess is that consciousness is a particular type of information processing, and that intelligence is also a typical type of information processing, but that there's a Venn diagram like this. There's some things that are intelligent and conscious. Some are intelligent but not conscious, and some of them are conscious but not very intelligent. And so the question then becomes to try to understand, can we write down some equations or formulate some principles for what kind of information processing is intelligent and what kind of information processing is conscious? And I think my guess is that for something to be conscious, there's at least some sufficient conditions that it probably has to have. There has to be information, a lot of information there, something to be the content of consciousness, right? There's an Italian scientist, Giulio Tononi, who has put a lot of creative thought into this and triggered enormous controversy also, who argues that there's one necessary condition for consciousness is what he calls integration. Basically, that if it's going to subjectively feel like a unified consciousness, like your consciousness, it cannot consist of two information processing systems that don't communicate with each other. Because if consciousness is the way information feels when it's being processed, right, then if this is the information that's conscious and it's just completely disconnected from this information, there's no way that this information can be part of what it's conscious of.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Ultimately, what's the difference between information processing, computing, and communication?
So communication, I would say, is just a very simple special case of information processing. Like you have some information here and you make a copy of it that ends up over there.
It's a volleyball you send over.
Yeah, volleyball you send over, copy this to that.
Yeah.
But computation can be much more complex than that. And then so that was information processing, communication, and what was the third word?
Computation.
And yeah, so computation and information processing, I would say, is more or less the same thing. Then you can try to classify different kinds of information processing depending on how complex it is, and mathematicians have been doing an amazing job there, even though they still don't know whether P equals NP and so on. But just coming back to consciousness again, I think a mistake many people make when they think about their own consciousness is like, can you see the beautiful sunlight coming in here from the window and some colors and so on? Right? Is to have this model that somehow you're actually conscious of that stuff, that the content of your consciousness somehow is the outside world. I think that's clearly wrong, because you can experience those things when your eyes are closed, when you're dreaming, right? So I think the conscious experience is intrinsic to the information processing itself. What you are actually conscious about when you look at me isn't me. It's the world model that you have, and the model you have in your head right now of me. And you can be conscious of that whether you're awake or whether you're asleep. And then, of course, you're using your senses and all sorts of analysis tools to constantly update your inner world model to match relevant parts of what's outside. And that's what your consciousness, that's what you're conscious of. So what Tononi is saying is that the information processing has to be such that there's no way of just, that it isn't actually just secretly two separate parts that don't communicate at all and cannot communicate with each other, because then they would basically be like two parallel universes that were just unaware of each other, and you wouldn't be able to have this feeling that it's all unified. I actually think that's a very reasonable criteria, and he has a particular formula he calls phi for measuring how integrated things are, and the things that have a high phi are more conscious. I wasn't completely sure whether that was the only formula that had that property, so I wrote a paper once and tried to classify all possible formulas that have that property, and it turned out there was less than 100 of them. So I think it's actually quite interesting to test if any of the other ones fit the experiments better than his. But just to finish up on the why people say consciousness is bullshit, though, I think ultimately the main reason is either they feel it sounds too philosophical, or they say, oh, you can never test consciousness theories, because how can you test if I'm conscious or not when all you can observe is my behavior?
Just a moment. Don't go anywhere. Hey, I see you inching away. Don't be like The Economy. Instead, read The Economist. I thought all The Economist was something that CEOs read to stay up to date on world trends. And that's true, but that's not only true. What I found more than useful for myself personally is their coverage of math, physics, philosophy, and AI, especially how something is perceived by other countries and how it may impact markets. For instance, The Economist had an interview with some of the people behind DeepSeek the week DeepSeek was launched. No one else had that. Another example is The Economist has this fantastic article on the recent dark energy data, which surpasses even Scientific American's coverage, in my opinion. They also have the chart of everything. It's like the chart version of this channel. It's something which is a pleasure to scroll through and learn from. Links to all of these will be in the description, of course. Now, The Economist's commitment to rigorous journalism means that you get a clear picture of the world's most significant developments. I am personally interested in the more scientific ones, like this one on extending life via mitochondrial transplants, which creates actually a new field of medicine, something that would make Michael Levin proud. The Economist also covers culture, finance and economics, business, international affairs, Britain, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, China, Asia, the Americas, and of course, the USA. Whether it's the latest in scientific innovation or the shifting landscape of global politics, The Economist provides comprehensive coverage, and it goes far beyond just headlines. Look, if you're passionate about expanding your knowledge and gaining a new understanding, a deeper one, of the forces that shape our world, then I highly recommend subscribing to The Economist. I subscribe to them, and it's an investment into your intellectual growth. It's one that you won't regret. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get a special 20% off discount. Now you can enjoy The Economist and all it has to offer for less. Head over to their website, www.economist.com/toe, TOE, to get started. Thanks for tuning in, and now let's get back to the exploration of the mysteries of our universe. Again, that's economist.com/toe.